Fraser, what do you make of this? It would be obvious to any police officer, presumably in Downing Street, what's going on just yards away.
Yeah, presumably a police officer can't allow that to be happening under their nose, or can't have not noticed. I mean, it was such a large gathering. We've all seen those pictures in the Downing Street garden. But then on the other hand, you have to think, looking back at it, should the police be investigating these things retrospectively? Should they be looking at breaches of the law of something that is no longer law? I do, in one sense, understand the police's current position on that. If anything, we should be, having seen all of the kind of elite rule breakers, all of the government rule breakers, we should be decriminalising what's gone on in the past. We should be handing back people's fines. We should not be pursuing these cases of lockdown breakers, sometime dark in the early days of the pandemic. I think it's probably time to move on from that period. Unfortunately, there are some governments, even in this country, in Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland, who would like to take us back to those dark days.
What do you think is the specific problem? Is it the actions of the politicians who had the gatherings? Is it the police who seem not to investigate it? What's the actual issue?
Well, I think it's a bit of both. I think people are rightly angry at the hypocrisy of the politicians in the garden. Now, they knew that was relatively safe. They knew it was safe to gather outdoors, and they knew that they could do so sensibly without infecting each other. They did not extend that courtesy to us. If you recall back at that time, I think it was in May 2020, it was still illegal to sit on a park bench. It was judged that you couldn't be trusted to sit around for more than a few seconds without somehow that turning into a large gathering and some super spreader event. I mean, it was completely crazy. It really didn't take the public seriously at all. So that's one key problem. And again, yes, the police, clearly, the police have been cracking down really, really hard on lockdown rule breakers. Sometimes the police have been enforcing laws that don't even exist. So you might recall, last Easter, I think it was, when the police were investigating what people were putting in their shopping bags, seeing if they were picking up Easter eggs and things like that, because they were considered non-essential. There wasn't even a law around that, and yet the police were enforcing it. And yet now we have this case, seemingly, where people are breaking the law, but they're politicians, and the police have turned a blind eye. So people have every right to be angry about this.
You use the phrase turning a blind eye. I mean, Baroness Jones puts it far more strongly. She says that there is a case to answer for the police aiding and abetting a criminal offence or deliberately failing to enforce the law in favour of government, politicians and their staff.
Well, yes, potentially that's true. I mean, I find it staggering to believe that police were not there, but then again, if you think about the actual circumstances, it's just it might have been right to use discretion. What they were doing was fundamentally not unsafe. It might have been in breach of the rules, but it was not unsafe. It's just a shame that the police and the authorities were never able to, take that kind of pragmatic view to the rest of us, unfortunately.
What's your view of how this has played out with the public in terms of the reputation of the police and also the politicians there, and potentially the person who leaked the photograph and probably sat on it for the last 18 months or so?
I think this has completely undermined any public trust in the sort of public health messaging, and certainly in the government. I mean, we've seen, Boris's authority has tanked. The Conservative Party are tanking in the polls. I think people are really rightly very angry about this. They can see that it's one rule for them and one rule for us. As far as the police are concerned, this comes after basically an annus horribilis for the police. We've had the Sarah Everard case of a sitting police officer being caught with murder. We've had police officers reprimanded and potentially sentenced to jail for taking pictures and selfies with the bodies of murder victims. I mean, it's just been disaster upon disaster for the police this year. And yeah, I think the whole kind of apparatus of government, every aspect of the state, whether it's now public health, the police, the government, the executive, is now sort of held with a bit of distrust by the public at the moment.
And huge pressure on Cressida Dick, but she still remains as the Met Police Commissioner.
It's a miracle that she still remains, because that is, this is yet another one of her failures. I mean, we recently had the inquiry into the inquest into the Stephen Port murders, and we saw a litany of police failures, and Cressida Dick was named as someone who was responsible for that. We also had another inquiry into the murder of Daniel Morgan came out this year, which named the Met Police as institutionally corrupt, and again explicitly called out Cressida Dick for her failings. This is also the woman who was responsible for the operation that led to the unlawful killing of John Charles de Menezes. So you do wonder how many disasters can Cressida Dick weather, but she's having her contract extended. It's extraordinary. So all of these failures, again, compound people's distrust with the police, the distrust with the state. There's just this sense that they are detached from accountability and detached from any kind of common sense.